Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today I'll be showing you how to apply HDR on games that has no native HDR support on both PlayStation 5 and PC. Now on PlayStation 5, you'll go to the setting and then go screen and video output. You go to HDR. Now you will have three options here. Off means that you will not get HDR at all. All your games will be running on SDR. On when supported means only when game is actually has a native HDR support, it will play on it in HDR. Now always on is where the HDR implementation will be always on whether the game support or doesn't support HDR. You will always get an HDR in this mode. So that means that games which has no native HDR support will play in HDR. Now I personally actually do not recommend this because the HDR implementation here isn't always good. Like you better off play those games on SDR mode rather than HDR. So I just prefer to keep this like on when supported. But you can experiment with it and just try the always on and see those SDR games. If you like them in HDR, just keep it always on. Now moving into the PC, there are two options to do this. The first one is by going to your system settings and go to the display and then use HDR. Now you will have this auto HDR. This will convert SDR games into HDR. But not all games actually are supported, just some of the games. And I actually, like at the beginning when this was introduced, it wasn't actually doing a very good job. Like the HDR picture was really fuzzy, but it has improved over time. So it's working very well right now. But bear in mind that not all games are actually supported. Now there is one thing you need to know is that don't keep this at on all the time because there is a bug currently that will let auto HDR interfere with games that has a native HDR support. So your HDR picture won't be accurate. Keep it off and just use it when you want to play a game that has no HDR support and see if it's actually supported by the auto HDR mode. Now the second option is through NVIDIA RTX HDR. Now NVIDIA RTX HDR apply HDR into all the games without any exception. Now in order to do this, you need to actually update to the new NVIDIA app, which actually replace the NVIDIA GeForce, the GeForce experience. This is the new NVIDIA app. Now NVIDIA starts rolling this new app from November 12th. So you most probably received a message to update your GeForce experience to the new NVIDIA app. And you have to do that because from November 12 onward, the new GeForce app will not receive any update from NVIDIA. So you will stuck with an old app with an outdated drivers. So you need to update to this new NVIDIA app. Now this NVIDIA app will replace both the GeForce experience and the NVIDIA control panel. So you can see here in the system, you get your display, video, and everything that's available on the NVIDIA control panel. And in the graphic mode, you have your global settings for the games. Now, in order to apply HDR, it is as simple as going to these three dots here, and then you will choose Add Program, and then select the games that you want to add that has no native HDR support. And then, for example, here, Black Myth Wukong. You will go to RTX, okay, here it is, RTX HDR, and then you turn it on, and then there's an RTX dynamic vibrance, which will give you additional setting if you want to turn it on. It will give you the parameters for the HDR intensity and the saturation boost, but I prefer to keep this off and just use the normal RTX HDR. Now let's run the game. Now we are inside the game. Now the thing that you need to do to make sure that the RTX HDR is working is by tapping Alt and Z to bring the NVIDIA overlay. Then go to Game Filter. Then you can see that RTX HDR is already applied to the game. Now there seems to be a problem, like we cannot adjust the peak brightness, middle gray. When the app was in the beta status, it was possible actually to adjust these settings, but for some reason it's only like giving you the option of on or off, and it will just automatically apply these default settings. You can also go and add RTX dynamic vibrance, but this doesn't look actually good. You can select, you can remove any filter you want also. Now there is a major downside when using RTX HDR, and that's you lose a couple of FPS, and on average between 5 to 7 FPS. So if you are someone who like to squeeze every single FPS out of his game, then don't use the RTX HDR. Now if your FPS are actually through the roof, like you are above 70, 80 FPS, then a 5-7 FPS won't actually make any difference. Unless you are actually between like 50 to 60 and you want to maintain that 60 FPS, then yes, don't use RTX HDR. And that's it for today's video. If you like the content, please consider subscribing. See you in the next video.